chief economist of the IMF, saying the fog around the world economic outlook has thickened. Why is that specifically?
And he's absolutely correct. It has thickened for three reasons. One is growth is less buoyant. They are now projecting very muted economic growth for the next 5 years. And without growth, you get all sorts of problems. The second reason is because of financial instability. We had some tremors in the US banking system. We were reminded that the system doesn't adjust easily to higher interest rates. And third, they are also worried about sticky inflation. So put all three things together, and we are now driving on quite a foggy motorway.
And why is the UK the worst of the lot among the major economies?
So it's worst of the G7 for this year. We are projected to contract by 0.3%, not as bad as they thought 3 months ago, but still the worst among the G7, as you point out, Mark. Two reasons. One is our inflation has remained much higher than elsewhere, and that impacts people's ability to spend. They have less money to spend. And secondly, is we've had much higher energy prices than elsewhere. So these two things have meant that domestic demand has been less of a driver of economic growth.
I ask because a lot of the factors causing the UK problems must also be causing the problems for other major economies.
So some countries are much more robust. Think of the US, they're energy independent, and they haven't had the inflation shock that we've had. In fact, we still have the highest inflation rate among the G7. That's one issue. And then the second issue is the ability to rely on the external world. We are still redefining our external trading relationship after Brexit. So we don't have the external engine that we once had.
And the picture on inflation, I thought, was better in the sense that, you know, it's coming down significantly, or we were told it was coming down significantly through this year. Is that still the case?
So inflation will continue to come down with two really important qualifications. The IMF doesn't think it's going to come down as quickly as they thought 3 months ago. And secondly, they're starting to realize something that you and I have discussed in the past, is that inflation may end up being sticky, that we may not see it go back to the 2% targets that central banks have. It may get sticky at about 3 to 4%, and then there'll be really difficult decisions to make as to what do central banks do at that stage.
Right. They still think, or they do seem to think, that interest rates could come down quite sharply.
They do. That surprised me a little bit because it's inconsistent with some other parts of their projections. I hope they are right. I suspect that when we look back, interest rates will not have come down as fast unless we get into one of their dreadful scenarios. You know, they put a 15% probability of a rather nasty scenario. And if that were to happen, that risk scenario, then interest rates would come down. But they would be coming down for bad reasons.
Right. Well, they're not always right, are they? Where do you think interest rates could be at the end of the year?
So I think we are going to still see them go higher in the short term. This will be as early as the beginning of May with the Federal Reserve. I expect they will hike another 0.25 percentage points. And then central banks will start to differ. The European Central Bank will continue hiking. I think the Fed will take a pause and see. But the Fed is telling the markets, you are wrong. The markets think that the Fed will start cutting interest rates and have it a whole percentage points lower. And the Fed is saying, no, markets, that's not going to happen. So it's going to be fascinating, Mark, to see who's right. The world's most powerful central bank or the markets.
Yeah, I mean, does the IMF really matter? Do the forecasts really matter? Because as people often say, certainly governments who are on the sort of receiving end of their forecasts, they say, well, they often get them wrong.
So, you know, I think of forecasts as doing one of three things in general. They either inform the debate, or they influence the debate, or they impose themselves upon the debate. I think in this case, we are somewhere between inform and influence. We're certainly nowhere near impose. This is very different. When the Bank of England came out, for example, with its forecast that if we don't do something, inflation goes up to 13%, that imposed itself on the debate, on the policy debate. Here, at best, it's informing and somewhat influencing the debate, but it's not going beyond that.
Right. Well, look, we only got 30 seconds left. When do we start pulling out of this gloom? You were talking in your first answer about them saying, what, 5 years or so? I mean, what are your views on it?
So I think they're too pessimistic over the next 5 years. I think we're going to pull out, but it's going to get foggier before it clears. And this is a world in which, unfortunately, people can make mistakes. So it's really important to have both financial and human resilience here.
OK, Mohamed, good to talk to you. Very interesting. Thanks very much indeed.